IPR policy and in contributions that you should make to the IETF, please familiarize yourself with our policy. I think probably by this point in the week, most of you have already seen this, possibly over 100 times during your career here at the IETF. For everybody who thinks they've seen the note well more than 100 times, please raise your hand. Okay. Keep your hands raised if it's more than 200 times. All right. I think we're well covered for most of you, but for the small number of people who have not seen it at least 100 times, please remember to note well. In the event of an IPR emergency, please seek a lawyer. Do not seek your chairs, seek a lawyer. All right, thank you for letting us know.
What? I picked... No, it's because... See, I wore the jeans today because tomorrow I got to wear the blue T-shirt.
Joe, could you send a note to Knock and see if they can find the MeetEcho folks? Or if you could check in the Jabber room if anybody from MeetEcho is there. Okay, I'll try that. MeetEcho : Okay. I was going to be amazed. This voice recognition stuff has gotten so good. Okay. So while Joe, who has already volunteered to be our Jabber scribe, is taking care of that, I would also like to thank Cullen and Alex for having agreed to take minutes for us today. Thank you very much. That means our administrivia is already moving fast because folks have already volunteered. They've collected your stars and their stars, and I encourage you later in the week to collect your own. This is our agenda for today. We are going to have some motivating requirements from Eric Rescorla, some additional possible requirements from industry from Philip Hallam Baker, a review of draft Barnes ACME and from Richard Barnes, and then discussion. The area director, who has just arrived in front of me, may have some questions for the room. I don't have your slides loaded yet, but we'll try and get those done. You sent slides, it looked like. So there may be some questions from the area director as we finish up. Is there anybody who would like to bash this agenda? Seeing none, I will just follow up with one reminder. This is not a working group forming BOF. You will notice that nowhere on this agenda is there a charter review or discussion. However, we want you to think about the work and how it fits into the IETF, and during the discussion, think about how the IETF could contribute to this effort if it wanted to, or what other appropriate actions might be. Reverend Rescorla.
The slides better say what I want them to say. So, oh, I see. This is the box, and this is the box. Like, what the?
Left foot yellow.
Exactly. Exactly. A spinner. All right. So I was asked to talk a little bit about what we're trying to achieve with ACME. So I work for Mozilla. We're sort of involved with this effort somehow. So what problem are we trying to solve here? The basic problem we're trying to solve is like not enough TLS on the internet, or not enough security in general, but especially not enough TLS because that's like the main thing you do for the web. So here are our current estimates out of Mozilla, out of Firefox telemetry, that roughly 30% of page loads are over HTTPS, and roughly 65% of transactions are. These numbers are different because of things like YouTube and Gmail, because Gmail is like a fantastic number of transactions doing AJAX, even though it doesn't like actually change the page much. This number should be 100%. Should be 110% really, but 100% we'll settle for. So there's a lot of reasons why this number isn't as high as we'd like, but there's a general feeling, I think, that one of the big reasons is it's hard to get certificates. Next slide. So I show this slide a lot. One of my esteemed colleagues, Cullen Jennings, was asked to get a certificate, and this is the transcript of the instant messages that I'm receiving from him about how annoying this is. So this took him 45 minutes, and he still didn't have one. He also has to hand over some money, so it kind of pissed him off. And this guy's got a PhD in signal processing, so he should be able to figure it out. Not good. So everyone sort of knows this. There's been some work in this area. You look at, over the past couple of years, of people sort of trying to automate this process so it's more fun. So you look at universal SSL from Cloudflare, or I guess there's this. I'm spacing on the name, but there's this Node package that does this. So there's been sort of SSL. Thank you. So recognition, this is a problem, right? So next slide. So Mozilla, along with EFF and Cisco and Akamai and Identrust, and I'm trying to remember one other person now, I think, has been trying to figure out how to do something about this. And so the background for this BOF, I think, is this new initiative called Let's Encrypt that we announced right after the last IETF that aspires to do a new, free, transparent, automatic CA. I'm not going to talk about this very much. This is motivation, but the objectives we have is it should be free, it should be automatic, it should be secure, transparent, and blah, 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 all these good things, but easy is like what you should be getting out of this, right? So if it's going to be easy, it's going to have automation. That's clear. Next slide. So what does this mean from a protocol machinery standpoint is we need automation of all the major operations so that it reduces the operational cost for us so we can do this for free, and it reduces the operational cost for the server operator so that they're incentivized to do it so it's not a big pain in the ass. That means that registration has to be automatic. The domain control validation, that is verifying that you are entitled to operate the domain that you claim to be entitled to or about to issue a cert for, that's automatic. And something people often don't realize is that the renewal of the certificate has to be automatic. So it's really common to see people who have bought a certificate a year ago and then they forget they have to renew, and then the certificate expires and their site's inaccessible, even though it was accessible 10 minutes ago. So that's really sucky. So what we want is a single-time interaction with the CA from the user's perspective, where I say, I want a certificate, and then their server continues to function in perpetuity with no intervention by them whatsoever. So that's what I mean by seamless. We have some demos on our site. There's nothing particularly special, nothing complicated, special about the demos. That you type some crap at the command line, Apache, and say like, I want the cert, and it goes and it just retrieves it, and a few minutes later your system is running. So, and then from then on, it just continues to work, and that's what you want. And finally, we want us to be flexible. So if CAs change their policies and practices, we'd like to have at least a fighting chance, because of the reason I just said, that your server will continue to operate even under those changes. So say the CA decides, for instance, that they want to require SHA-3 certificates. It'd really be nice if you didn't have to do anything to make that work. Next slide. So here's some examples of the kinds of challenges that we think that a protocol that does this has to be able to encounter, to be up to. So here's an example, certificate lifetimes, right? Certificates now tend to have relatively long lifetimes, a year, 5 years, 10 years, whatever. And we rely on OCSP for verification, and OCSP is like, you're going to have a bad day. Right now, I don't believe any major browser hard fails on OCSP failures. If certificates revoked, basically all the attacker has to do is gag the OCSP server and the browser will continue. So that's not so awesome. There's been a lot of talk about doing this stuff called must staple. Phil Palm Baker has a draft on this, about requiring basically you can get an OCSP response and then you can stuff it in the TLS handshake, and there's a way to indicate in the certificate that better be there or you should fail. So we're talking about doing that with hard fail, by which I mean that if that weren't there, you'd actually fail, and you wouldn't even try the OCSP query. There's also been a lot of talk about short-lived certificates. Short-lived certificates are certificates which have a lifetime on the same order of an OCSP response, so somewhere between a couple days to a week or so. And there's an alternative to OCSP must staple. There's an isomorphism between these. This is a natural fit for automatic renewal, right? If we have a system which automatically goes and gets a new certificate whenever it needs one, then that's adaptable. That's adaptable if the CA decides to unilaterally shrink the lifetime of the certificate down from like a year to 6 months to a week or whatever, because the server tells you when you need a new cert, the CA does, and you just go get it. So this is an opportunity for CAs to be able to adapt their policies with people who, without requiring the users to go through horrible, horrible burdens. As opposed to if you're doing it manually, then it's a hassle. So it's one kind of challenge you'd like to have this be able to resolve. Next slide. Another example will be new algorithms. So right now, servers typically support RSA. Sometimes they support ECDSA certificates. So what we now know CFRG is defining new curves, and we might be able to do signatures perhaps over those curves, or we might move to EDDSA or lattice signatures or post-quantum or whatever, right? So you can't make this quite as seamless because obviously you can't preemptively add these things to your client before you know they exist. But if you have an automatic negotiation, one thing that can happen is that basically the CA can add the capability to issue for these new kinds of keys, and then when you update your server software, it says, oh, I noticed the CA can now issue me EDDSA, so I'm going to get one of those as well. So it's not quite as nice, but you can still do automatic upgrades. That's a feature you'd like to have. Next slide. The final feature that, and again, these are exemplary. This is not supposed to be an exhaustive list, but I'm trying to give you a sense of the kind of challenges we think we have to face. Talk about delegate issuance. So say you have a big server farm, and you have, I don't know, lots of servers for a given domain, or lots of domains for a given server because it's multi-tenanted, or you have some mix and match thing where you have like a big server farm that serves hundreds of domains on thousands of servers with like some common, with like some binary selection for each one goes which on a changes on a daily basis. So it's really a pain if you have to keep revalidating every time. And it sure would be really nice if you could establish control of each domain once, and then whenever you want a new server that stands up and supports a new subset of the names, you simply say, okay, give me a certificate that matches that exactly. And if you look at the way Acme's done this, exactly how it works, obviously, there's an authentication key which is tied to some class of domains, and then you can request issuance for any subset of that. So that's basically, again, another thing you'd like to be able to handle. Next slide. Good. I should mention one more thing that I forgot to put on my slides. That the other thing we think this is that is about flexibility of validation mechanisms. So right now, CAs do some number of validation mechanisms. It sure would be nice to have a system that was flexible about that. And in particular, in this context, what's really relevant is Dane. And so right now, if you offer Dane, and there's only a very small fraction of clients, if any, which can accept that, right? But in the future, that might not be the case, but there's a chicken and egg problem because it's hard to use Dane without getting a backup certificate for ordinary TLS. So one thing that is very nice about a sort of automatic protocol is you can simply transition from Dane Dane plus 509 to Dane only in a gradual way, with the automatic system picking up the slack of basically automatically reissuing your certificates based on your Dane records. So that basically this gives you a temporary bridge while we sort of get wide Dane deployment. So that's particularly relevant in this context. And again, it's something you can only do if you really have a lot of automation. My overall message is that whatever protocol is needed here is one that has enough flexibility to let us move forward in a way that requires minimal user intervention as we sort of try to figure out what kind of policy and procedure would best fit the internet. In terms of what our interest is as far as IETF, or rather it's Encrypt's interest, which I'm sort of like representing today, though I don't work for them, is we have to develop this. We understand other people working in this area. There's some really nice work. It'd be great if we could all use kind of the same stuff. As usual, we need this anyway, so we'll go ahead. But it would be great if we could find people to collaborate with, and if there's enough interest, we'd like to standardize it.
Dan Harkins, why isn't S the solution to your problem?
S turns out to be a partial solution, but it doesn't have any support for the validation piece. It outboards the validation to external credentials. And frankly, when we looked at EST, it also wasn't as convenient for the platforms that we were interested in implementing on. Sir.
Yaron Sheffer, more a requirement, a request for a requirement than a question. Walled gardens. It turns out that in many cases it's more cost effective to use a commercial CA than to set up your own internal CA for servers that are not on the internet.
Yes.
I would have liked for this, or a fork of this or whatever, to be usable for internally within enterprises.
Right. So I think that actually, again, that's not what's in Chris' focus, but it's not something we think is bad. I think the way that's a service that EST is actually better suited to provide, but it's something that if you look at ACME, ACME can handle, and the assumption would be you populate some ACL with the keys that were authorized usually for certain domains, and you have an out-of-band agreement with the CA where you demonstrated that, and then so that you just skip the whole piece where you did the online validation, and it certainly would be valuable in a protocol like this to have an identity proof mechanism that supported that. It's just not the highest priority for Let's Encrypt.
Jean-Michel Combe, what about certificate transparency?
Yes, that's an orthogonal question, I think. Certainly, any protocol we define could be compatible. I would assume would be compatible with certificate transparency. But we're talking about defining a protocol, so I don't think you'd mandate it in the protocol specification.
Michael Richardson. So I had two questions. One was about things that aren't HTTP. I'm thinking specifically IMAP, POP,
yes,
and that stuff, particularly for places that maybe can be made to work where it's all one box. It also has a web server for that same name. But the other thing that actually I think is more interesting and important in the walled garden space is the lights out ILOMs, those boxes, where we're essentially training junior to mid-level IT people to forever click through the certificate warning because this stuff just never has one.
Yes.
And I don't know if that you're thinking if that is somehow in SCAPE, making it fit into these,
right,
the client side fit into that space. Well, these are not they're not particularly constrained, but they are really annoying boxes.
Sure. So I think there's a Let's Encrypt answer and a ACME answer. Maybe they're a little different. I think from Let's Encrypt perspective, we're not primarily focused on either of those cases initially. Although, at some point in the future, we might be interested in doing non-web. It's just that web is the first target. From an ACME perspective, I'd be very sad if ACME, as it came out, could not be extended to handle exactly the cases you're talking about for other kinds of non-web services. And if you look at the design, there's a sort of extensible proof mechanism for being able to prove possession of different things. And so I'd certainly hope that that mechanism would be flexible enough to support other things that were not web. From the perspective of ILO and stuff like that, the problem with any walled garden scenario is there a mechanism for demonstrating what is the identity you're asserting, and what is there a mechanism for demonstrating control of that identity? And certainly, if you could tell me what the mechanism for demonstrating control of the identities in ILO was, we could have a conversation about how that would work. But until I figure that out, I'm kind of confused.
So I'm going to cut the line here. Remember, we're going to have a general discussion after the full set of slides. But no, that means the people who are in line. Okay, then Daniel, you have the...
DKG. Hi, Daniel Kahn-Gilmore. So just wanted to point out that it actually isn't completely orthogonal to certificate transparency, particularly in the section that you talked about ramping down the time for the certificates. Mm-hmm. One of the things that OCSP lets you do is you have fewer certs in the log, and then you have regular OCSP updates.
Yes.
If we're talking about ramping down to short-lived certs, and we're logging everything, then the log balloons in size. So
right.
I just wanted
So
to make sure
that's absolutely true. So actually, Ben and I have chatted about this a little bit, and I think I suggested to Ben that perhaps it'd be nice if CT would log key identity pairs rather than logging certificates for precisely this reason. Oh, fantastic! Follows a better way. But I mean, just generally, you're quite right. Yeah, obviously CT will not scale well if you have to issue certificates every 22 minutes. You're up next, so you can tell the better way now.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually that's just one of those things you put on the requirements pile and just trust us. If we're going to come back, we'll have an answer. So next slide, please. So I'm Philhan Baker. I'm with Komodo. I've spoken to some of the industry partners, but we've not really got into a long discussion with it. So when I'm talking from experience here, it's confined to Komodo, but I'm only speaking for Komodo, but I think it's probably the same for most other large CAs. So where we are now is we actually have tools that make automation of certificate issue possible and reasonably straightforward. So we have standards-based certificate enrollment, we've got easy to use, and they're not the same thing. They're two completely separate paths. We would like these two things to be one. Now, why do we want to go from our proprietary standards our proprietary schemes to a standards-based one? Next slide. Well, the answer is that plugins just don't deliver. At the moment, to use our automated schemes, you have to put a plugin in your server. And the administrative cost of the plugin is vastly greater than the time saved in cut and pasting a CSR. And yes, I know that it's 45 minutes for Cullen. Well, you know what? Putting a plugin into your web server is a lot more than 45 minutes. And the problem with plugins is you can't test them because, one plugin works. 2 is a combinatorial problem. And 3, well, so you just can't test the interactions. I want to go to a standards-based mechanism because that's the only way that I can automate this scheme in a way that makes things actually easier for my customer rather than harder. Next slide. So looking at it from our position as an established CA, what we want that's common with the Let's Encrypt manifesto is we want frictionless usability. So like I posit in Prism-Proof email, absolutely no unnecessary user effort. The user should not need to do anything differently when setting up a secure website to setting up a regular website unless some additional information is required from the user. And we definitely want those short-lived certs. A killer for us would be any new ASN1. From my point of view, the canon of ASN1 schema has closed. We have burned all our ASN1 compiler tools. We don't want any new stuff. We want JSON, and the reason for that, I'll come to that a bit later, but it makes it possible to solve all the additional requirements that I'm going to come to without making the base spec too complicated. We also want ACME in some ways is going to be the first JSON-based security spec. We would like whatever tropes that ACME introduces in producing a protocol to be tropes that we can use on other security protocols without having the how we're going to use JSON discussion coming up every time. We also need to interop with existing back-end systems, and we have hardware security modules and lockdown systems that expect to see a CSR for proof of possession. So that's one piece where we want to see a maintaining compatibility with existing ASN1, but we don't want to see any new ASN1 structures appear. Next slide. So looking at it from our point of view, specific requirements, we obviously want a choice of CA there. And we also want a way of charging the customer. And we also want to support all our PKIX-based products. For me, it's not going to be a very exciting move to move just my TLS customers with DV certificates to a new enrollment protocol. It's only really going to be interesting to me is if I can move offer this to all my customers for all their needs, so that if they choose to have 6 DV certs and then upgrade to EV, then that's possible for them. We want to do TLS, and we also want to do S-MIME. We actually have a large number, 750,000 S-MIME certs paid, which shocked the heck out of me when I found that out, but it turns out to be what we have. So one thing that this means that you can't assume the issue of the certificate is going to happen immediately. If you're doing extended validation or organizational validation, you're going to start the attempt to register, and then other information is going to have to come in out of bound. And so it's not going to be a run this tool once and then you're done. There's going to have to be some delay and some ability to pick up certificates after the fact. But actually that's not all that different from the certificate renewal problem, which also has to be solved. And obviously we need to have the ability to add in those additional criteria for validation for EV, etc. Oh, and private label certs are also quite big. We have quite a lot of certs that don't appear in TLS or public CAs at all. So next slide. Another bigger industry-specific requirements probably have more impact on the model is we use local registration authorities for a lot of certificate issues. If you're a large organization like, say, Hewlett-Packard or whatever, you're going to want to have part of your CA infrastructure deployed inside the enterprise, and the actual certificate issue is taking place on the CA back end, but you've got a lot of local control. So we want to have an ACME model that allows us to provide an enterprise with the local control of a local registration authority while still chaining up to a back-end CA with all the Tier 5 security, etc., that a proper CA can provide. We also want to be able... so one thing that might happen long-term is... obviously, one case is this is going to be the device talking ACME protocol to the LRA. It's also possible that they may be talking another JSON-based protocol that is higher level. And it might be that the way you want to configure that in the cloud is when a new web server comes up or a new mail server comes up, it might be saying, hey, I want to do X. I want to do these protocols. You give me all the stuff that I need to do my job, and I'll go and do it. And you might have a protocol of that type, of which certificate registration is only one small fraction. There will be a massive amplification of ACME rather than just the base ACME protocol. We want to be able to provide customers with management tools so they can see all the certificates that they have subscribed for that are currently active, and they can see, oh yeah, there's a device there, 666.example.com. We've got a certificate for it. What's it doing? You know. And in some cases, you might want private key information to be traveling from the LRA to the device. I'll explain the reason for that on the list. They're a bit complicated here. Okay, some technical points. We've got there's a record, the Certificate Authority Authorization record, which is an existing RFC. There are hooks in that. It was designed to be expandable. Where you're trying to discover, where is my CA? What CA should I register under? CAA records might be one way that we can do it. And Paul Hoffman, when we're discussing the CAA record, he actually proposed using the DNS name for identifying the CA for this very purpose, and I think that was a very good extension of CAA record. We don't necessarily need to go to market with an ACME specification day one that supports every feature, provided that we don't have bits in the code that nail down and exclude particular applications. One of the nice things about JSON is you can add in slots as required, provided you've not made some brain-dead assumption in the system. So, for example, don't assume that when you're making these requests of the CA or the server or whatever, don't assume that the key that the server is going to use is going to be the same key. The key that the server is going to use for TLS is going to be the same key that they're going to be used for subscribing for certificates and authenticating that request. You probably want those to be different, actually. So next slide. And one thing that I have to raise, this isn't our IPR, but when you're designing the validation protocol, we'll need to be sensitive to the fact that there are quite a few CAs out there that have patents pending or issued that cover methods of validating DV certs. And I know that our scheme took us a long time to work out because we were dancing around all this IPR. I don't have all that IPR in my head, sorry. I would have to do quite a bit of research to work out who owns what and so on. But when we're designing this protocol, we should not assume that there's going to be just one way of validating the cert, because if we do that, then we'll end up being sued up the ass. And that's it. So questions? Gosh, I answered all your questions.
Okay, let's bring Richard up, and while he's coming up, a quick question. Who hasn't signed the blue sheet? Oh my goodness gracious over here, you people. I'm going to deputize you to find the other people. After Olaf is holding it up, please raise your hand again.
Which box do I stand in? So my name is Richard Barnes. I work for Mozilla, and I've been helping out with drafting the spec for the Let's Code project, which we're trying to generalize out that project to be this general ACME protocol. Next slide, please. So the idea is, you install some piece of software that's going to do all the ACME magic and auto-configure your server with the cert and all that. But what really happens under the sheets when we do the protocol here? So I thought it was helpful. What? Yeah. So if you got your laptops out, which you all do, load the URL at the top. You can see this form on your laptop. But the idea here is I thought it was helpful to look at what an existing free cert issuance process looks like. So this is a web form from WOSI, a Chinese CA, that offers a free SSL cert service. And they collect a bunch of different information here. So you have to tell them the domain name and whatever else you want to go in the certificates. They have like duration fields and things like that. They have a couple of different ways you can verify that you control the domain. You can provision a file on your web server. I think they'll do the email style verification as well. You have to provide them a CSR to show that you own the private key that you want corresponding to the cert you want. And you have to provide them a contact, an email address, and a password so that you can prove that you are the guy who requested this cert and verify it at possession of the domain when you go to pick up the cert from them. They also have a CAPTCHA and a subscriber agreement, which it turns out is required by the CA browser forum if you want to be a CA. So this is sort of an example of the sorts of things that we probably want to capture in the ACME protocol, right? These are the sorts of information that the web server or the thing requesting a cert is going to need to provide to the CA in order for the CA to be able to issue a certificate. So next slide. So this is a diagram out of the ACME spec of sort of how the ACME protocol reflects these pieces of information. I'm sorry the green is so bright and might be a little hard to read, but the idea is we have three basic types of object with one kind of sub-object. We talk in terms of registrations, authorizations, and certificates. So registrations cover the who am I, the identity, the contact information, the credentials that you're going to use to access the ACME service. So that's where we have contact information and authentication and the subscriber agreement concept. So registration is, when you first show up at an ACME server, you register, you go to the new registration endpoint, you get a registration, and then you head over to the new authorization endpoint. At that point, you say, I would like to prove that I own example.com. You put in the domain name you want, and you do this authorization process. ACME then has a challenge and response sort of protocol for verifying domain control, and it's extensible to support a few different types of ways to do that domain validation. I use domains here as an aside. We use domains in the slides here, but the way the protocol is structured, there's a type. The identifier structure has a type and a value, so you can currently defined type as domain name, but in principle, the protocol could support other types of identifiers like phone numbers or MAC addresses or whatever the CA can validate. You'd need different challenge types to verify possession of those identifiers, but in principle, the protocol is extensible in that way. So you go through this challenge and response thing to prove you own the domain name, and then you can hop over to this new cert endpoint and drop your CSR in and get a cert once you've proved you're authorized. The reason for the separations we've got here is twofold. The separation between authorizations and certificates, you might note that authorizations look sort of like certificates in that they're a statement by the CA that the CA believes that you are authorized to act for this domain name. But the reason we separated those from certificates is to support some of the use cases Ecker called out in his slides, where you might want to have a data center where you've got hundreds of different servers serving different combinations of SANs, and you want to verify, you want to prove ownership of each of those domains that the servers are covering once, and then be able to issue a bunch of different combinations, issue certificates with a bunch of different combinations of those names. So the idea is you do the authorization to prove that you control each name, and then you can issue certificates with any combination of the names that you control. The separation between registration and authorization was to try and separate things that are generally regarded as public from things that are generally regarded as private. in particular in Let's Encrypt, we're going to try and publish all of the authorizations and certificates in sort of a certificate transparency mode. But we didn't want to have to publish all the contact information we were getting from people because for obvious sort of spam and privacy reasons. That also lets us, it opens up the door for ACME to support sort of user management models, maybe groups and things like that. Adds an additional level of flexibility. So that's the overall architecture of how the protocol hangs together. I've got some examples of concrete protocol messages on the subsequent slides. So the whole protocol runs in JSON messages over HTTP. All the messages from the client to the server, from the subscriber to the CA, are signed with a key pair, and that key pair acts as the account identifier for the entity applying for certificates. In the document, we call that an account key pair. So with registration, we begin by associating contact information and agreement with some terms with that key pair. So that initiates the user into the CA's management system, and the CA just says, yes, sure, I've got this. Next slide. Once you've registered and have sort of said this is my public key and who I am, you can then sign requests to authenticate to be authorized for a domain with that key pair. So the message on the left here is the subscriber saying, I would like to request authorization for example.org for that domain name. And the signature by the account key pair associates this authorization request with that entity that's requesting it. Now here's where it gets kind of interesting. So the subscriber says, I would like to prove control of example.org, and the server responds with an authorization object. So it has a status. We have sort of pending, valid, invalid sort of statuses you would expect. It echoes back the identifier and the key that were requested, and then it issues a set of challenges. It says, the server says, okay, if you want to prove that you own example.org, here's how I require you to do it. Next slide, please. So like I said, ACME has an extensible set of challenge types. So each challenge message has a type thing that says, here is the mechanism you should use to prove your control of this domain. I think there's 2 or 3 in the document right now, obviously, especially if additional identifier types are added, we'll need different types of challenge. But then the other fields in the challenge say, here's some properties of the URI is how you respond to the challenge, and then the token is the stuff you're supposed to provision. So simple HTTPS asks you to go provision a file to a given path on the web server, and then the response says, here's how you go check that I fulfilled that challenge. Yeah, Alex.
Alex Mayover, HTTPS is the only validation method you're thinking about, or could it also be DNS-based?
So I believe in the document right now we have simple HTTPS, a mechanism that's based on server name indication in TLS, and a DNS-based mechanism.
Okay.
Obviously, if people have other ideas for ways that a third party could validate that another party owns a domain name, yeah, we're open. And it may be also that there's sort of pre-validation cases can be handled with different challenge types as well. So yeah, the flow is, you get this challenge in the authorization method, and then you post this response back to the URI that's in the challenge. So you respond to a challenge-specific URI. And I sort of leave out a step there, but once you've completed this and the server has gone off and verified the domain control, the client can pull that authorization URL it got and look for that authorization to turn green, to turn from pending to valid, and then it knows that the CA considers it authorized for example.com. Next slide, please. So now the client knows that it's authorized for example.com. It can go ask for a certificate. This is pretty minimal. It generates a PKCS10 CSR, sends a link to the authorization that the client believes authorizes the certificate, signs it to prove that it's bound to his authorized account key, and sends it up to the server. And the server sends back the certificate if he agrees, and sends back an error code if not. Yeah.
Suppose I have a web server and I get owned for a half hour by a hacker and now I find out about it, I clean up the server, but now he already has a certificate for my server for the next 3 years. Is there any way, I don't know, for me to know about it or something?
Yeah, I mean, maybe an answer for this, but I mean, this is the same problem any conventional CA has. There's no difference here. The answers are things like CT and revocation or calling Adam Langley.
I'm Langley Google. So we've just had a whole bunch of sites discovering you shouldn't allow users to register usernames like administrator if you provide them email access. Are we also going to have a bunch of sites realizing they shouldn't allow users to register the name .wellknown? Yes. Can we require like a weird content type on this thing or something that is going to be less error prone?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of really technical discussions to be had around the specifics of the validation mechanisms.
Okay, I'll leave it.
Yeah, I'm just trying to capture the overall architecture here.
Yeah, I think this would be one of the places where it would be good to get CAB Forum to be involved so that I would like to have a definitive list of email addresses that boneheads don't allow common and garden people to get, and there should be something like this for that.
There is not an email validation mechanism in the document right now. Maybe we should add one, maybe not. And it's worth noting that CAB Forum has been working on tightening down their list of validation mechanisms, so this will probably require some coordination with them in terms of making sure that whatever gets defined
Okay,
here
remember we do have a whole discussion section, so just clarifying questions at this point, please.
Just very short. Domain names change ownership, so it would be good to have a mechanism that allows for querying whether a domain name is authorized and potentially overwriting the authorization.
Yeah, I think the thing it's a really important point that this is validates at a point in time, and it may be useful to have some sort of reauthorization or scoping of authorization to force revalidations. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, so this is just a summary of the overall process. You sign up for Unity registration. If the CA requires some sort of subscriber agreement, it sends back the URL. You indicate your agreement. Then you request authorization for your domain. The CA sends back challenges. You respond to the challenges, and then you poll to see if your authorization is valid. And then once you're valid, you issue a certificate. So try to sort of make it as minimal as possible within the set of use cases we wanted to support. So any further clarifying questions on the protocol as we have it today?
Dan Harkins again. Is there a way in this workflow for the CA to specify what type of public key for the client to generate in the CSR to support, like Echo was talking about, ECDSA or EdDSA or something like that? So can he say, make a key with the P384 elliptic curve or something like that?
Right. There's a couple mechanisms that I think we kicked around when we were drawing this up, and I don't think either of them is reflected in the current draft. It seems like it would be desirable to have the CA be able to express basically the policies for what it will issue. So covering key lengths, key algorithms, any extensions it might allow or not allow. We had thought about, there's sort of two approaches to getting to that. You could do it at the certificate request stage by returning error types if someone requests something that you don't like, or you could have some sort of policy publication mechanism as an adjunct to the existing queries we've got here. I don't think there's anything in the document right now to do that, but it would probably be a good thing to add. Other questions? All right, thanks.
Okay, folks, so we have about 15 minutes for discussion now, and there are two topics. The first of those two topics is really around the work. Do people find this work and the scope that's been presented here interesting so far? Are there other use cases they want to bring up at this time? Well, so this is for discussion. I'm not asking for a hum. So this is the moment when, if you want to talk about the scope of the work, etc., you would get up.
Alex Mayover, I absolutely love this. This is very much needed in the industry because all the providers who deal with a lot of certificates, it's a big hassle, and there's really a real need for that. Yeah.
Hi, Nick Sullivan, Cloudflare. So I have a question about this that is a little bit about the scope of this document itself on ACME. Is why was the decision made to make the account key the authentication mechanism for getting certificates? The main question I have about this is that if you do have a wide deployment and a lot of sort of cloud instances that you're spinning up, you have to send this very sensitive account key to each one of these machines in order to get a machine from it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the assumption was quite the contrary. So maybe we've messed this up, but the idea was exactly to address that use case. And the idea was that when the machines spin up, they would send their public keys to whatever box intermediated the CSRs through the box that had the account key, and that would ask for approval. So if there's some, I mean, the idea was precisely to avoid the problem you're talking about. So maybe it's bungled, but that's the idea. So if that's not working properly, then we'd like to fix it.
Phil Humbaker, yeah. I think maybe what we should do is to split the protocol into two and have an ACME Direct and an ACME LRA and describe the two separately, because connecting up directly to the CA is one set of use cases. Connecting up through some intermediary, I think, is a different set of issues, and we probably want to separate that out in a separate protocol.
So back mic, please. Given that, why don't we just aggregate everybody to the front mic, please?
Yeah, I think the battery's dead. It's turned on, but it's dead. Anyway, Justin Richer, and my question for twofold for all three proposals so far is that I will very strongly get behind anybody that makes me never have to write a CSR ever again. And two, I'd really like to see something that us adopt an approach that will also work for applications that just need a bare key pair, that don't need a CA and a signing chain and all of this other stuff. We're seeing a lot of applications that get by with publishing a JWK at an HTTPS URI, for example, and that's kind of a hack, but it works. Yeah, but this would actually let me potentially distribute it and things like that. So.
This is Joe channeling Jan from the Jabber Room. Are there people in the session who would really like wildcards? What are their use cases? Oh, wait, sorry. Yeah, I'm wondering how people generally feel about support for issuing wildcard DV certs in ACME. Are there people in the session who would really like wildcards? What are their use cases? We've heard from a few people for whom that wouldn't work. For example, randomly generated domain names on the fly.
Go ahead.
Max Pala. I was thinking about this work, and actually, it seems to me, besides the fact that most of the format that is chosen kind of duplicates the work that we've been doing in the PKIX working group a long time ago with CMC, so managing the certificate life cycles with CMS. But besides the format, which is not very important, one thing that I wanted to point out is that one of the biggest problems that we always faced in the CA world was discovering services. And this is something that we started to tackle a little bit in the PKIX, but then the working group died. And it's something that Philip, I think, pointed out when using the DNS records. But it's something that I think we should focus a lot more because it's the biggest problem when I want to have look for which CA I want to get my services from and how to discover the different services provided, and maybe looking at the fact that there might be federation of types of CAs that I want the services from, but I don't care which one I want the services from. So like some kind of federation, the concept of federated CAs.
That's an interesting point, but let me up-level that a little bit. What I'm hearing is support for flexibility in the CA and support for a discovery mechanism are primary. Elliot?
Thank you. Elliot Lear. 3 quick comments and a question. Comment number 1, in answer to your question, I think this is a very important problem. Comment number 2, I think it's a very nicely constrained solution. And comment number 3 is keep on going. And the question is, have various CA vendors shown interest?
Well, certainly Let's Encrypt has shown interest, and I believe that Phil has shown some interest. We have some that have.
George Michelson, AP Nick. So I have a small number of comments in like sense to make. Without attempting to objectify any one individual, what I believe I heard on entry was, please preserve my business model. And that concerns me because there are qualities in the current CA business model that I actually think we do not wish to preserve. So I just want to make that observation. The second observation I wanted to make is intermediaries are somewhat concerning to me. I understand the CA-RA split, but in effect, we're partly here because some intermediaries acted badly and issued certs we don't think should have existed. So there are qualities in intermediaries that make me extremely uncomfortable. Okay, a third comment, slightly to one side. I am very, very concerned about the traction behind Dane. I want Dane to succeed, and there's a limited amount of clue in the universe, and if we divide the clue into this room and the Dane room before Dane is complete, we won't get Dane. I need Dane modules in browsers. I need Dane modules in systems. Dane is very important, and one of the reasons Dane is important is because it gets rid of the CA business model, which is one of the main goals. So I'm slightly concerned about aspects of this project. Having said which, I think it's a really cute model.
Let the record state that 52 minutes into an hour BOF, we're already concerned about a crisis of success, which I think is rather quick work on a
hour-long non-working group forming BOF.
Is the question we shouldn't do this because it might disrupt the Dane business model?
No. Okay, so let's close the line after Ecker, because I have another question to ask the room. But Richard?
So 3 quick points. On the question of separation, whether there's a need for an explicit delegated model or 2 different flavors, delegated and direct, I think it would be worth looking at the question of whether ACME could be used in sort of back-to-back fashion, where an end client does a certain flavor of ACME with the CA, and then the CA does, or with the RA, and then the RA does another flavor of ACME with the CA. I think that it may just be a profiling exercise to look at what you need in each of those cases. Second, on the question of wildcards, I will say that that's among the top questions I've gotten from people since I've been involved in the Let's Encrypt project. So it's probably something the working group is going to want to take a look at and consider whether what validation methods might be appropriate to that, and what the security considerations should be around the issuance of wildcards. Ultimately, it's probably going to come down to operational decisions by CAs using this interface, but it's worth, I think, at least having some discussion in the working group. And the last point on Dane, I actually think this is a supportive technology for Dane, in the sense that it has the potential to interact really well and be a use case for DNSSEC in the sense of using DNS signatures to prove possession of a domain, and signatures over objects you might put in the DNS to prove your control of a domain, to provide a higher degree of authentication as a basis for issuance of certificates. As Ecker pointed out, I think this can also provide a sort of a bridge to Dane. By lowering the cost of certificates, it effectively removes the extra costs that you would have to incur to support legacy browsers if you also do Dane.
Mark Nottingham, Akamai, but not wearing the Akamai Let's Encrypt hat. This is good. I think this is important. I agree with the previous speakers. From an HTTP perspective, I suspect I have issue with some of the ways it uses HTTP, and I'm willing to help improve that, because I would cry with joy if we could get one RFC that uses HTTP well out of the IETF. That would be fantastic. Ever. Yeah. But I would love to help.
What, WebDAV isn't your friend?
Them's fighting words. And Rushki's not here to protect you.
Yeah, but Ecker's right behind you, and his wife was one of the...
That's always something to worry about, isn't it? I'm not going to go into Dane. I strongly disagree with what my former esteemed colleague said about the relationship here. but I think that we don't have enough time to talk about that.
Okay, so I assume he's still esteemed, just not a former colleague. Oh, okay. All right.
Wolfgang Beck, Deutsche Telekom. I'd like to add another use case, which is providing ZIP Connect 1.1 IPBBXs with certificates, which is a huge hassle today. But I think it's quite possible they're using HTTP certificates, so it shouldn't be a problem.
Eric Wiscarla, Mozilla. Yeah, I guess I'm a little confused by the hate from my esteemed non-former colleague. I mean, it certainly isn't about impacting the CA business model is about the fact that the browsers and other clients accept certificates and nothing else. And this is about allowing people to talk to those browsers securely as much as possible. As far as Dane goes, honestly, I think that the analysis that was offered there is actually completely backwards. The problem with Dane now, as people can tell you, is that we have a standard collective action problem, which is to say that because there are no clients which accept Dane, there's no value in offering Dane, or practically no clients, and because practically no one offers Dane, there's no incentive for the clients to accept Dane. And so one of the ACME and in general automatic issuance offers the possibility to break that log gem by giving you a valuable reason to do Dane even if nobody accepts it, to use as a stronger form of issuance, and also to allow you to deploy a Dane certificate while only some small fraction of people accept Dane and the rest accept certificates. So as Richard said, this is a bridge to universal Dane deployment, and in fact the only scenario I've ever understood where you could get browser-based Dane deployment from 0 to 100 under any plausible scenario. So quite the contrary, I think. If you like Dane, you should be excited about universal automatic issuance, not unhappy about it.
Okay, so I know the area director was going to send me some questions to ask, and I never got them, so I'm going to ask some different questions, almost certainly, and then turn the microphone to him for the last thing. How many people in the room are either have currently read the draft or intend to after having seen today's presentations? Damn, that's good. Forgive the bad language. I was just so shocked. I have the vapors now. How many people in the room are either already on the ACME mailing list or intend to join it after today's presentations? All right. How many people in the room currently believe that this is so complete and baked they don't need to help? Michael Richardson and Jeff Houston were the only hands I saw. Oh, no, there's one more in the corner. So there are 3 very trusting people, and the rest of you think there's some work to do here. Otherwise, I assume you're not reading the drafts and doing the joining the mailing list. Okay, so I think what I'm hearing, I'm going to risk the next two hums. This is not a working group forming buff, so this is just a sense of the room. How many of you think that there's work here for the IETF? Please hum now. How many people think there is no work here for the IETF? Please hum now. Okay, that was funny, but I need to ask the hum again because the laughter overrode it. If you think there's no work here for the IETF, please hum now. Okay, one person near a microphone somewhere. Okay, so the last words will go to our esteemed area director to see what questions he would have had me ask that weren't those.
Those were good. I guess I only have one further question, I guess. So I think the plan here is that there seems to be people willing to do this. I think there seems to be agreement that there's a thing to be done. So I guess the question is whether we should just go ahead and do it when start getting people writing a charter, maybe not in the next weeks, but in the next month or two, or whether we should have another buff before we do that. So how many people would be? So what I want to know is, are people okay with that plan? So if the plan is to, let's say with the plan to just go ahead and form a working group, do the chartering on the list and so on. In a month or two.
I'm very much in favor of that plan.
Okay. So do you want to comment?
Adam Langley, Google. So the IETF does have a tendency to take things and take a really long time and then come out with something that's slightly different from what's used in practice. So the reason why I hummed against having the IETF do something here was that I hope Let's Encrypt spit out a working CA shortly. And then if the IETF were to standardize something that wasn't what they were using and wasn't what the world was using, which is quite possible, that would be quite a sad outcome.
They're behind you. So I guess, what time are we at?
We just hit our time. Yeah.
Okay, so the mic line is closed, and so
speaking not officially for Let's Encrypt, but my understanding of Let's Encrypt's posture is that we intend to spit something out prior to IETF standardization and would hope to harmonize with IETF as long as it was not too radically different and insanely so. Yeah, which I understand is not the best outcome in the world, but we also don't think, and we certainly be more than pleased if people just adopted whatever the hell we did.
Okay, so
we don't expect it.
Yo, was it very quick?
Very brief. Quickly skimming the drafts, it looks close enough to bake that we don't need a working group. This can be done as an AD-sponsored draft with all the comments that you can get.
Got the point?
On a list.
I don't think I agree. Anyway, so... Okay. Okay, so I want you to hum now if you think just going ahead and forming a working group in a couple of months is a reasonable thing. So if you think that's a reasonable plan, hum now. If you think that's not a reasonable plan, please hum now. Okay, so I guess we'll do the rest on the list. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everybody. Go get some cookies. So do you know where to take the blue sheets? No. Okay, take the blue sheets over to the registration desk and give them to the secretary. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good job.
Thank you.
Thanks. Well, so I presume if this does go ahead, you want to...
I would like to see a paradigm for how you implement atoms and more commitment so thought leadership. Well, the other thing is, because